Death is not an ending, but a reorganization of everything you are into everything else. I spent my life studying atoms, watching them split and merge, release energy and reform into new configurations. After Trinity, after watching the first atomic fire bloom in the desert, I understood something most people never consider. Your body, your thoughts, your memories, all of it is energy temporarily organized into patterns we call consciousness. When death comes, those patterns dissolve. The carbon in your bones becomes carbon in soil. The hydrogen in your blood becomes hydrogen in rain. The electrical impulses that create your thoughts don't vanish, they transform, following the same laws that govern stars and stones. This is not philosophy. This is physics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only changed from one form to another. You are energy, borrowed from the universe for a brief time, shaped into the miracle of awareness. Before we continue, take a moment to notice where you're listening from, and if this story stays with you, you're welcome to return tomorrow for what comes next. I keep Niels Bohr's lecture notes from 1922 on my desk, the margins crowded with my youthful handwriting. The pages are yellowed now, brittle at the edges, but the questions I scribbled there remain as sharp as the day I wrote them. If atoms are mostly empty space, I had written in careful script what holds us together, what makes us real. I was 28 then, studying at Cambridge after Harvard. My mind still flexible enough to be genuinely shocked by what we were discovering about the nature of matter. The atom, we learned, was not the solid billiard ball of earlier imagination, but something far stranger. A tiny nucleus surrounded by electrons in a vast emptiness, like a marble in a cathedral. Yet somehow these ghostly structures assembled themselves into everything we knew, into rocks and trees and human flesh. The implications kept me awake at night in my Cambridge rooms. I would lie in the narrow bed, staring at my own hand in the darkness, trying to comprehend that what I was seeing was not solid at all, but a dance of particles, mostly space, held together by forces I was only beginning to understand. The flesh that seemed so permanent, so undeniably real, was nothing more than atoms borrowed from the earth, organized temporarily into the pattern that carried my name. Bohr had a way of speaking that made these revelations feel both magnificent and unsettling. The opposite of a correct statement is a false statement, he would say in his careful English. But the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth. He was speaking about quantum mechanics, but I heard something deeper. We were discovering that reality itself was far stranger than anyone had imagined. My fellow students struggled with these ideas differently than I did. Some embraced the mathematical beauty and ignored the philosophical weight. Others rejected the implications entirely, treating quantum mechanics as mere calculation rather than description of reality. But I found myself unable to look away from what we were uncovering about the nature of existence itself. The carbon in my pencil, I realized, was the same carbon that might once have been part of a tree, or a breath exhaled by some long-dead creature, or even the heart of a distant star. The calcium in my bones had been forged in stellar fires billions of years ago, then scattered across space when those stars died, eventually finding its way into the soil that grew the food that built my skeleton. I was not separate from the universe, but made of it. A temporary arrangement of ancient matter. This understanding came with a peculiar burden. Once you truly grasp that your body is a collection of atoms obeying physical laws, you cannot pretend that death is somehow exempt from those same laws. The medieval notion of an immortal soul inhabiting mortal flesh becomes impossible to maintain. Whatever I was, whatever made me me, had to be explicable in terms of atomic behavior and energy states. I remember the exact moment this became more than academic understanding. I was walking along the Cam on a gray October morning, thinking about a lecture on chemical bonds. The river moved slowly past, carrying fallen leaves that spun and tumbled in the current. Each leaf had been part of a tree just days before, but now it was decomposing, its complex molecules breaking down into simpler compounds, its organized structure dissolving back into the water and air. Yet nothing was lost. The carbon atoms that had formed the leaf structure were still carbon atoms. The energy that had organized them into living tissue was transforming into other forms. Some would feed the bacteria breaking down the leaf. Some would warm the water as molecular bonds released their stored energy. Some would eventually become part of new growth downstream. The leaf was gone, but everything that made the leaf continued. Standing on that bridge, I understood that human death had to follow the same pattern. The intricate organization that we call life The specific arrangement of atoms that creates consciousness and memory and personality might dissolve like the leaf in the stream. But the atoms themselves, the fundamental energy that animates them, would continue in new forms. Death was not destruction, but transformation. This realization brought both comfort and unease. Comfort because it meant that nothing truly ends, that we are part of something larger and more enduring than our individual existence. Unease because it suggested that what we treasure most about ourselves, our memories, our relationships, our sense of continuous identity, might be nothing more than temporary patterns in the flow of universal energy. I began to see this pattern everywhere. The wood burning in my fireplace was releasing energy stored by photosynthesis years before. The food I ate was being broken down into component molecules that my body would reorganize into muscle and bone and brain tissue. Even my thoughts, I realized, were electrochemical processes, patterns of energy moving through neural networks built from atoms that had existed for billions of years. The human body, I calculated, completely replaces most of its atoms every 7 years. The calcium in my bones, the carbon in my muscles, the iron in my blood, all of it was different matter than what had composed me as a child. Yet somehow, the pattern persisted. The organization that made me recognizably myself continued even as the underlying substrate constantly changed. I was like a river, maintaining its shape and character while the water flowing through it was never the same. These insights shaped everything that followed in my life. When I later found myself calculating the energy release from splitting uranium atoms, I was drawing on an understanding that had begun with Bohr's lectures on atomic structure. When I stood in the New Mexico desert watching the first atomic explosion, I was seeing the same fundamental forces that govern the quiet transformations happening in every living cell. But in those early years at Cambridge, the implications remained abstract, philosophical. I knew that I was made of atoms, that my death would follow natural laws, but these were ideas rather than felt truth. It would take the war and the urgent practical work of harnessing atomic energy to make me understand viscerally what I had learned intellectually. Only when I saw matter transform into pure energy in the space of microseconds would I fully grasp what it means to say that death is simply another kind of atomic reorganization. The marginalia in Bohr's lectures still ask their young man's questions about the nature of reality. But now I know that the questions themselves reveal the answer. We ask because we are the universe becoming aware of itself, atoms arranged into patterns complex enough to contemplate their own existence. And when those patterns dissolve, the awareness returns to the source from which it came. The classified report sits in my safe even now, decades later. Technical report, number 1, Los Alamos Laboratory, dated March 1943. My own handwriting fills the margins with calculations that would have seemed like fantasy just years before. Numbers that described how to release the energy locked inside uranium nuclei. Energy that had been waiting there since the formation of the Earth itself. I arrived at Los Alamos in April of 1943, driving up the dusty Mesa Road to what would become the most extraordinary scientific community ever assembled. The site was chosen for its isolation, but I found something fitting in the location itself. We had come to this high desert to unlock secrets hidden in the hearts of atoms, and the landscape seemed to echo the starkness of what we were attempting. Red rock and vast sky, with nothing to distract us from the fundamental questions we were asking about the nature of matter and energy. The urgency was unlike anything I had experienced in academic life. This was not theoretical physics pursued for its own beauty, but science with immediate and terrible purpose. Hitler's Germany was rumored to be pursuing the same research, and we knew that whoever succeeded first would hold power beyond anything previously imagined. Yet, even under this pressure, I found myself constantly amazed by what our calculations were revealing about the basic structure of reality. The energy we were learning to harness had been there all along, of course. Every uranium atom in the Earth's crust contained the same potential for release that we were now calculating how to trigger. The difference was organization, control, the precise arrangement of matter that would allow the energy to escape in a sudden, controlled burst, rather than the gradual decay that had been happening naturally for billions of years. I remember the evening I first calculated the total energy content of a single uranium nucleus. The number seemed impossible. If Einstein's equation was correct, and all evidence suggested it was, then even tiny amounts of matter contained energy beyond anything humanity had ever accessed. A single gram of uranium, if completely converted to energy, would equal roughly 20,000 tons of TNT. We were not creating this energy. We were simply finding ways to release what had always been there. Working late in my office, I often found myself thinking about my colleagues' mortality in ways that would have seemed morbid before the war. Young physicists who might not survive to see their research completed.
Older men whose bodies were already showing the strain of overwork and stress. The irony was not lost on me that we were studying the deepest secrets of matter while surrounded by the most pressing reminders of human fragility. Klaus Fuchs, brilliant and secretive, working through calculations with the focused intensity of someone aware that each equation might determine the fate of nations. Robert Serber, my former student, now grappling with engineering problems that would have been pure science fiction just a decade earlier. Enrico Fermi, whose Chicago reactor had already proven that controlled nuclear chain reactions were possible, now helping us calculate what would happen when we removed all controls. Each of these men was, I realized, a temporary arrangement of the same atoms we were learning to split. The carbon in their pencils, the calcium in their bones, the iron in their blood, all of it had been forged in stellar cores and distributed by ancient supernovae. Now we were learning to mimic on a small scale the same nuclear processes that had created the elements of which we were made. The mathematics was elegant, almost deceptively simple. When a uranium-235 nucleus absorbs a neutron, it becomes unstable and splits into two smaller nuclei, releasing tremendous energy and additional neutrons. Those neutrons can trigger more splits, creating a chain reaction that grows exponentially until all available fuel is consumed. The energy release follows directly from the mass difference between the original uranium nucleus and the fission products. Matter becomes energy according to Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, where c is the speed of light, a very large number that, when squared, transforms even tiny amounts of matter into enormous quantities of energy. But understanding the process intellectually was different from grappling with its implications for human existence. If matter and energy were truly interchangeable, if atoms could be split and reformed and rearranged according to natural laws, then human death had to follow the same principles. The energy that animated our bodies, that powered our thoughts and sustained our lives, was subject to the same conservation laws we were exploiting in our weapons research. I began to see death differently during those Los Alamos years, not as a mysterious transition to some unknowable state, but as a natural consequence of the same physics we were studying. The chemical reactions that power living cells are fundamentally similar to the nuclear reactions we were learning to control. Both involve the release of energy stored in atomic bonds. Both follow conservation laws that ensure nothing is truly lost, only transformed. The body's energy comes from breaking down food molecules and using the released energy to power cellular processes. When death comes, these reactions stop, but the energy doesn't disappear. It dissipates as heat, is absorbed by decomposing bacteria, returns to the soil and air from which it originally came. The atoms that compose the living person begin new combinations, new arrangements, new forms of organization. The carbon becomes carbon dioxide, then perhaps part of a growing plant. The calcium returns to the soil, then perhaps becomes part of new bone in some future creature. Working on the atomic bomb, I was studying transformation on a scale and speed that made these biological processes look glacial by comparison. But the fundamental principle was the same. Matter rearranges according to natural laws. Energy flows from one form to another, and nothing that exists ever truly ceases to exist. This understanding brought both comfort and responsibility. Comfort because it meant that death was not an ending, but a transformation, part of the same natural processes that had created us in the first place. Responsibility because it meant that the energy we were learning to release had real consequences, would transform matter and energy on a scale that could affect the entire planet. The calculations and technical report. Number 1 described how to release energy equivalent to thousands of tons of conventional explosives from a device small enough to fit in an aircraft. But reading them now, I see something else. They document humanity's first systematic understanding of how matter becomes energy, how the stable arrangements that seem so permanent can be transformed in an instant into new configurations. We were learning to be like nature itself, rearranging matter and energy according to fundamental laws. Soon we would have a chance to witness this transformation directly, to see matter become energy in the space of microseconds. And in that moment, I would understand viscerally what I had known intellectually for years, that all existence is transformation. All matter is borrowed energy, and death is simply nature reclaiming what was always hers to begin with. The manuscript lies before me, unfinished and likely to remain so. Energy conservation in biological systems
My attempt to describe death purely in terms of physics, without sentiment or mysticism, only mathematical certainty. I began writing it 3 years ago, thinking I could distill a lifetime of understanding into equations and explanations that would comfort others as they had comforted me. But some truths resist simple telling. Yet let me try once more, not for publication, but for clarity. Let me tell you exactly what happens when a human being dies, based on what I know about atoms and energy and the laws that govern all matter in the universe. Your body contains approximately 7 billion atoms. This is not a metaphor or approximation. It is a countable number, though impossibly large. These atoms are not uniquely yours. They have existed for billions of years before you and will continue for billions more after you are gone. What makes you you is not the atoms themselves, but their current arrangement, the temporary pattern they have assumed under the influence of the information encoded in your DNA.
This pattern is maintained by constant energy input. Every moment of your life, your cells are breaking down glucose and other nutrients, releasing the chemical energy stored in their molecular bonds. This energy powers everything from the beating of your heart to the firing of neurons in your brain. Your body is not a static structure, but a dynamic process, a pattern of energy flow that maintains its organization only through continuous work. When death begins, whether through disease, injury, or simply the accumulated wear of time, this energy flow begins to falter. The precise mechanisms vary, but the fundamental process is always the same. The organized systems that maintain the pattern of your existence start to break down. Cellular respiration becomes less efficient. Waste products accumulate faster than they can be cleared. The delicate chemical balances that keep your organs functioning begin to shift. At the moment of death, energy input stops. Your heart ceases to pump blood, depriving your cells of oxygen and nutrients. Without oxygen, cells can no longer maintain the controlled oxidation that releases usable energy from food molecules. The electrochemical gradients that power cellular processes begin to dissipate. The pattern that was your living body starts to unravel. But here is what I want you to understand. Nothing disappears. The atoms that composed your body remain exactly what they were. The carbon atoms in your bones are still carbon atoms. The hydrogen in your blood is still hydrogen. The nitrogen in your muscles, the phosphorus in your DNA, the calcium in your teeth, all of it persists unchanged in its fundamental nature. What changes is organization. The complex arrangements that allow these atoms to work together as a living system begin to dissolve. Enzymes that once catalyzed precise chemical reactions become inactive. Cell membranes lose their integrity, allowing their contents to mix and react in new ways. The electrical activity that created your thoughts and memories fades as neural networks lose their coordinated function. This dissolution follows thermodynamic principles as exactly as any other physical process. Your body temperature equalizes with your surroundings as the chemical reactions that generated heat slow and stop. The energy that once maintained your organized complexity is released in accordance with the second law of thermodynamics, spreading outward to increase the entropy of the universe. But this energy is not lost. Some of it becomes heat that warms the air around you. Some powers the bacteria and other organisms that begin to break down your tissues, returning complex molecules to simpler forms. Some is stored in the chemical bonds of compounds created during decomposition. The energy that once animated your thoughts and powered your heartbeat transforms into new forms, new patterns, new organizations of matter. The atoms themselves begin new journeys. Carbon dioxide from your decomposing body enters the atmosphere, where it may be absorbed by plants through photosynthesis. The carbon that was once part of your muscle tissue might become part of a tree's cellulose, then paper, then perhaps the page on which someone else reads these words. The hydrogen from your blood might become part of rainwater, nourishing crops, eventually becoming part of another person's body. This is not poetry, but physics. The conservation laws that govern atomic behavior ensure that every component of your being continues in new forms. Your death is not a subtraction from the universe, but a transformation within it, a rearrangement of matter and energy that follows the same principles that created you in the first place. But what of consciousness? What of the sense of continuous identity, the feeling of being a unified self that persists through time? This is where the physics becomes most challenging to accept, because it suggests that what we treasure most about ourselves is the pattern rather than the substance. Your thoughts are electrochemical processes occurring in neural networks built from ordinary atoms. The memories that define your personal history are physical structures, specific arrangements of proteins, and connections between brain cells. Your personality, your emotions, your sense of humor, and your fears, all of these emerge from the organized activity of matter following natural laws. When death dissolves this organization, the patterns that created consciousness dissolve as well. The electrical activity that generated your thoughts ceases. The neural connections that stored your memories break down. The brain structures that created your unique way of processing the world return to simpler chemical forms. This might seem to suggest that consciousness simply vanishes, that the person you have been throughout your life disappears entirely. But even this conclusion may be too simple. Information theory suggests that patterns, once established, leave traces in the larger systems of which they were part. The words you have spoken changed the people who heard them. The actions you took shifted the trajectory of events around you. The love you gave and received altered the neural patterns of other conscious beings. In a sense that is physically meaningful rather than merely metaphorical, you become part of the larger pattern of human culture and memory. Your thoughts influence other thoughts. Your choices create consequences that ripple forward through time. The information that was uniquely you becomes part of the vast interconnected web of human understanding and experience. Even more fundamentally, the atoms that composed your brain carry forward the history of having been organized into consciousness. Quantum mechanics suggests that information about past states persists in subtle ways, that the universe itself has a kind of memory embedded in the structure of matter and energy. The carbon atoms that once participated in your thoughts retain some trace of that participation as they move on to new combinations and arrangements. I have lived with this understanding for decades now, and I find it profoundly comforting. Not because it promises some continuation of personal consciousness after death, but because it places individual existence within a larger context that is both scientifically accurate and emotionally satisfying. We are not separate from the universe, but expressions of it. The atoms that make up our bodies were forged in stellar cores and scattered by supernovae. The energy that powers our thoughts flows from the sun through photosynthesis and cellular respiration. We are the universe becoming aware of itself, matter organizing into patterns complex enough to contemplate their own existence. When death comes, we return to the source from which we emerged. The organization that created our individual consciousness dissolves, but the matter and energy that made us possible continue in new forms. We become part of the ongoing creative process that has been building complexity and beauty throughout cosmic history. I think of my own death now without fear, understanding it as I understand the death of a star, not as an ending, but as a transformation that releases energy for new creations. The carbon in my bones will become part of new life. The hydrogen in my blood will fall as rain on future gardens. The patterns of thought that I call myself will influence other minds and contribute to the ongoing conversation of human consciousness. This is what happens when you die. You stop being a separate pattern and become part of the larger pattern. Your matter rejoins the cosmic circulation that created you. Your energy transforms into new forms and flows toward new organizations. You do not survive as an individual consciousness, but everything that made you possible continues, and everything you contributed to the universe becomes part of its permanent story. It is enough. It has to be enough, because it is what the laws of physics tell us must happen. But more than that, I find it beautiful. We are stardust that learn to think, temporary eddies in the flow of cosmic energy, brief organizations of matter that achieve the miracle of self-awareness. When our time as individuals ends, we return to the vast creativity that made us possible, contributing our small portion of complexity to the endless dance of transformation that is existence itself. The manuscript remains unfinished, but perhaps this is enough. Perhaps the real understanding comes not from equations, but from acceptance. The recognition that we are part of something larger and more enduring than our individual lives, and that death is simply our way of rejoining the source from which we came.